5 minutes had passed since I hid in the closet. Suddenly, I heard a noise from the room, so Charlotte cautiously opened the closet door slightly to peek outside. A faint light from the room illuminated Charlotte's face, making her expression clearly visible. Fear was evident in her eyes. I gently placed my hand on Charlotte's shoulder, trying to calm her down. However, Charlotte turned towards me in surprise and slowly pointed to the gap in the door. It seemed she wanted me to check outside. Confused by Charlotte's unusual behavior, I nervously peeked through the gap into the room. Charlotte stopped me with her hand as I almost let out a gasp. My body trembled, and I was glued to the scene before my eyes. What I saw was Michael asleep in the bed where we had been lying. But next to him was another woman. "Is that?" "My name is Mila, a 48-year-old housewife. It's been about 2 years since I married Michael. Before I got married, I worked as a curator at an art museum, spending my days surrounded by art. Because of that, I had few opportunities for typical dating, focusing on my career throughout my 20s and 30s. I met Michael when he visited the museum as a sponsor of an art exhibition, and we started dating because of our shared interests. Having been in the business world for a long time, Michael introduced me to many new perspectives with his knowledge and experience. As our relationship progressed, I learned that Michael had a daughter named Charlotte from his late wife. With almost no dating experience, I was initially shocked by this revelation, but Michael respected my feelings and waited until I was comfortable with it, without rushing our relationship. I think his understanding attitude deepened our bond. However, no matter how considerate Michael was, the issue remained. After a long period of deliberation, I finally decided to meet Michael's daughter, Charlotte. At 11 years old, just entering adolescence, Charlotte showed no hostility towards me but seemed indifferent. Still grieving her mother's recent passing, she kept a certain distance from not only me but also from Michael. Despite this, I tried to stay positive. I couldn't leave her alone. Meeting Charlotte gave me the courage to make a significant decision. Her presence wasn't an obstacle to marriage. Instead, I resolved firmly to protect and make her happy. When I confided these feelings to Michael, he was overjoyed and proposed to me immediately. I accepted his proposal and started a new life as Michael's wife and Charlotte's stepmother. I quickly moved into the house where Michael and Charlotte lived. Having visited many times, this house was now to become our new home for the three of us. The 2-story house Michael had bought shortly after having a child with his first wife was more than spacious enough for the three of us. However, once I started living there, I began to notice things that hadn't bothered me before. It was the traces of his first wife all over the house. Even though I understood she had passed away, the many remnants she left behind troubled me. Her paintings hung on the living room wall, and her favorite books lined the shelves in the study. And then there was the armchair she used to sit in often. Every time I came across these traces of his first wife, I felt like she was still present in the house. Michael was oblivious to this and didn't notice my discomfort. When I mentioned the mementos, he casually said, "You can get rid of them if they're in the way." But even with his permission, I couldn't do that. Erasing the traces of his first wife throughout the house felt disrespectful to their daughter as well. Despite the unease, I decided to leave her belongings as they were. Another thing that concerned me after starting our new life was Michael's attitude towards me and Charlotte. Before we got married, I hadn't paid much attention, but it seemed like Michael was avoiding Charlotte. The reason wasn't clear, but his actions clearly reflected this feeling. Moreover, Michael, who had once been so kind to me, had grown distant. He didn't openly belittle me, but I could sense his affection had cooled. Michael often came home late on weekdays, claiming to be busy with work, and sometimes even stayed overnight at the office. Before we got married, he used to go on dates with me and spend time at home with Charlotte, but since the wedding, his return times had become significantly later. It was clear he was pushing Charlotte onto me. While the details were unknown, Michael seemed to have had negative feelings toward his first wife, which now appeared to be directed at Charlotte. I began to worry if I was just a convenient housekeeper for looking after her. Did Michael really love me? Even though I spent more time with Charlotte, she didn't open up to me easily. She wasn't rebellious or disobedient, but there was always a formal distance. I understood it wouldn't be easy for her to accept a new mother right away. But I felt this situation wasn't good for either Charlotte or me. Especially Michael's attitude was concerning. Despite being newlyweds, I couldn't fully enjoy it and found myself consumed by daily anxieties. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare Charlotte's lunch, made breakfast for the two of them, and sent them off. Then, I did the laundry and cleaning, had leftovers for my own lunch, and was busy with shopping and preparing dinner in the afternoon. In my hectic daily life, I didn't have time to face my anxieties. I wasn't sure if this was good or bad, and before I knew it, 2 years had passed. Charlotte turned 13 and started middle school, but Michael still didn't show any concern for her, leaving school meetings entirely up to me. Charlotte communicated more than before but hadn't fully opened her heart to me. Still, she said thanks when I made her lunch and helped with chores more often. Even with few words, it was enough for me. I felt this was a comfortable distance for both of us. One day, in the midst of this, Charlotte suddenly said, "I've thrown away all of Mom's things. I'll clear out the closet too." The way she said Mom showed how considerate she was being. I was surprised that Charlotte knew her mother's things were in the closet, but I decided to let her handle the mementos. "I'm sorry to trouble you. But you don't have to throw away your mom's things if you don't want to," I said, but Charlotte immediately responded, "It's okay. I should have cleared out this stuff a long time ago." Saying this, Charlotte packed everything from the closet into garbage bags. I felt a mix of emotions, but it seemed like this was an important step for Charlotte to come to terms with her feelings. I expressed my genuine thanks, but shortly after, I faced a new challenge. I found out that Michael was having an affair. The discovery came in the most mundane way imaginable. I had gone to the Saturday morning market to buy fresh vegetables for Charlotte's lunch. As I made my way through the crowd, I suddenly heard laughter. It was Michael's voice. Beside him was a young woman I didn't recognize, and they were walking hand in hand. At first, I thought she might just be an acquaintance, but their behavior made it clear they were more than just friends. They seemed lost in their own world, oblivious to the bustling market around them. Watching them from a distance as they picked out vegetables, I couldn't believe my eyes. But the way they exchanged glances and subtly touched each other made it obvious that Michael and the woman were in a close relationship. It was clear from their occasional glances and subtle touches. Seeing this, I was filled with anger and disappointment. Yet, I had to accept it as reality. So, I followed them for a while. It seemed they went to the woman's apartment. She was probably going to cook for Michael using the ingredients they'd bought at the market. This realization hit me with a mix of rage and a deep sense of betrayal. But a part of me wasn't surprised, thinking, I knew it. Michael was always leaving Charlotte with me while he enjoyed his time with another woman. He must not have divorced me because I was taking care of Charlotte for him. To him, I was just a convenient housekeeper. Back home, I thought deeply about the future. What kind of future awaited Charlotte and me? I wondered whether I should tell Charlotte about Michael's affair, but concluded that it would only hurt her deeply without solving anything. So, I decided to let Michael's behavior slide, believing it was for the best for both of us. I was angry that Michael was neglecting Charlotte, but I genuinely felt that I loved her. Realizing this, I was overwhelmed with guilt and couldn't sleep all night. 2 days later, I started making lunch for Charlotte as usual. Michael hadn't returned home, saying he had an urgent job that required him to stay overnight. He was probably still at the hotel with the woman from the previous night. With this gloomy thought in mind, I quickly finished preparing the lunch. Then, Charlotte came down the stairs earlier than usual. "Good morning," I said, hurriedly plating the rest of the lunch and placing it on the table for her. "Sorry, was today an early school day?" I asked. Charlotte shook her head and said, "No." She quickly finished the breakfast I had prepared, said thank you, and headed straight for the front door. "Here's your lunch," I said, handing the lunchbox to Charlotte as she put on her shoes. She took it and said, "Thank you," looking me straight in the eye before adding, "It's okay. I know everything." Then she hurried out of the house. What does she mean by everything? I muttered to myself, even though I was alone. It must be about Michael's affair. But how did Charlotte find out? Had she known all along and kept quiet for my sake? Maybe, like me, Charlotte had been trying to keep it to herself. Even though Charlotte didn't explain further, I was convinced she knew everything. Strangely, though, I felt a sense of calm. But why was Charlotte heading out so early in the morning? Was she planning to confront Michael directly? While I didn't think Charlotte would do anything reckless, I couldn't help but worry. All day, I was on edge, eagerly waiting for Charlotte to come home. By evening, Charlotte returned acting as if nothing unusual had happened in the morning. I decided not to bring it up and behaved as usual. Then, something unexpected happened around dinner time. Just as Charlotte said I'm home, Michael came back surprisingly early. "I've already had dinner out," he said, glancing at us before heading straight to the bathroom. I looked at Charlotte, unable to hide my surprise and confusion, and she nodded meaningfully. "I'm tired, so I'm going to bed early tonight," Michael said after his bath, heading directly to the bedroom. I lightly said, "Good night," as I saw him off. He had never come home this early before. I had a lot of questions, but Charlotte's eyes pleaded with me not to ask anything. We cleaned up after dinner as usual, each of us taking a bath in turn. Though it wasn't clear what would happen next, I felt a strange foreboding as I stepped into the bedroom where Michael was sleeping. What is this?" As soon as I opened the bedroom door, I felt an unusual presence. The whole room was filled with an inexplicable misty air and a faint fishy smell. It didn't have the warmth typical of summer. The bedroom was unnaturally cold, and the chill was so intense it made me shiver the moment it touched my skin. Michael, lying in bed, seemed completely unaware of this change, sleeping soundly. Though puzzled by how different things felt, I crawled under the covers to escape the cold. Despite the strange coldness and silence in the room, the eerie atmosphere persisted, but as soon as I got under the covers, an overwhelming drowsiness hit me. Normally, I have trouble falling asleep, but tonight the sleepiness was so intense it felt like I was being pulled into it. Even though it was still night, I could barely keep my eyes open, and a heavy sleep engulfed me. My eyes closed weakly, and soon my consciousness was completely swallowed by darkness. "Mom! Mom, wake up!" I don't know how much time had passed, but suddenly I woke up to someone shaking me. Forcing my heavy eyes open, I saw Charlotte shaking me desperately. "Charlotte, what's wrong? It's still the middle of the night, isn't it?" Still half asleep, I glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. In the silence of the night, Charlotte pulled me out of bed. "Hurry, come with me." Charlotte grabbed my hand and dragged me into the closet. Still groggy, we squeezed into the small space together. "Why are we doing this at this hour?" As I started to speak, Charlotte quickly covered my mouth with her hand. 5 minutes passed since we hid in the closet, and then I heard a noise from the room. Charlotte cautiously opened the closet door slightly to peek outside. A faint light from the room illuminated Charlotte's face, making her expression clear. Fear was evident in her eyes. I gently placed my hand on Charlotte's shoulder, trying to calm her down. But Charlotte turned towards me in surprise and slowly pointed to the gap in the door. She seemed to be urging me to check outside. Confused, I nervously peeked through the gap into the room. Charlotte stopped me with her hand as I almost let out a gasp. My body trembled, and I was frozen by the sight before me. What I saw was Michael asleep in the bed where we had been lying. But beside him was another woman. "Is that?" Under normal circumstances, I would have suspected an affair, but I instantly realized that this woman wasn't alive. Her long black hair hung down as she stared intently at the sleeping Michael. From Charlotte's silent expression, I understood that this woman was Michael's deceased first wife. Listening closely, I heard her whispering something to Michael. I couldn't make out the exact words, but every time she spoke, Michael's body trembled slightly. This scene repeated over and over, and we remained frozen in place. Eventually, the morning light began to fill the room, and the first wife's figure gradually faded away. Once she had completely disappeared, we could finally move. Charlotte and I hurried out of the closet and left the room. We collapsed onto the sofa in the living room, realizing that my pajamas were drenched in sweat. Charlotte's light t-shirt was also soaked with sweat. We sat in silence for a while, still in shock, until Charlotte spoke in a heavy, somber voice.
"You saw her, right? Mom was angry."
She forced out the words. "Charlotte, did you protect me?" I asked, and Charlotte slowly nodded. "Mom hasn't forgiven Dad. He cheated on her while she was sick." Then, Charlotte continued to speak, little by little. Apparently, the first wife resented me as well. And I couldn't really blame her for that. Because the other woman was me. Michael had told me he'd been married before, but he never mentioned that his wife was still alive at the time. I'd been deceived from the start. Michael must have only seen me as a fling, using me to take care of his daughter. I unknowingly took her husband and lived happily while she suffered, so it's no wonder she held a grudge. But this morning, I went to Mom's grave and asked for help. Charlotte said to me, looking pale and downcast. There was a reason Michael's first wife had appeared. It turned out today was the anniversary of her death. Charlotte had visited the grave and told her about me. It seemed Charlotte had some kind of mysterious power, inherited from her mother, who also saw ghosts when she was alive. Charlotte had started disposing of her mother's belongings to minimize their impact on me. As the anniversary got closer, I felt Mom's presence getting stronger. "I do resent Dad, but I don't hate you, Mila. You're a victim because Dad deceived you too." Charlotte said that Michael's return last night was also due to her mother's influence. Some mysterious power had brought Michael back here. Though Michael hadn't woken up yet, Charlotte was certain. Dad will eventually be taken away too. Those words sent a chill down my spine, but Charlotte quickly reassured me. Not physically taken away, I mean emotionally. Charlotte's calmness gave me hope that the worst might be avoided. As we talked, I lost track of time, and Charlotte seemed to have forgotten about school. It's impossible to live a normal student life under such circumstances. I looked at the clock. It was already 8:30 a.m., time for Michael to leave for work. I was unsure whether to wake him, but then I heard Michael stomping down the stairs. His demeanor was clearly off, likely affected by last night's events. His eyes were vacant as he sat in the kitchen, unmoving. "Dad, don't you have something to say? Is it true that Mom came last night?" Charlotte stood up from the sofa and approached Michael. Hearing Charlotte's words, Michael's eyes briefly regained some clarity but then quickly filled with confusion. "Huh? What are you talking about?" Michael said, visibly disturbed by Charlotte's mention of her mother's visit. The words snapped him back to reality for a moment before fear enveloped him again. "I wanted to help you, but you cheated again, didn't you? You haven't learned anything. You don't cherish Mila, and you don't feel sorry for Mom either." Charlotte's harsh words left Michael even more shaken. Everything Charlotte pointed out was true. "Are you insulting your parent?" Michael, angered, raised his hand towards Charlotte, but I hurriedly stepped in between them. The next moment, my hand struck Michael's cheek. "I can't take this anymore. Stop showing us this pathetic side of you." As I slapped his cheek, I shouted with all my anger. For a moment, anger flashed in Michael's eyes, but his expression quickly turned to one of defeat. He seemed unable to believe he'd been reprimanded and looked deeply hurt by my blow. "Charlotte saw through everything you've been doing. You thought you were hiding it well? But she knew it all, how you ignored your sick wife and cheated on her." I told Michael everything Charlotte had shared with me. The resentment she lived with from her dying biological mother, the feelings of abandonment, and the contradiction of being raised by me, Charlotte had carried these burdens alone. "Have some shame. What kind of father are you? Now that everything's out in the open, we have no reason to stay here. Stop making these baseless accusations. I didn't abandon anyone.
This isn't my fault.
Michael argued, crying, but his lack of remorse only drove him further into a corner.
I can't even understand what you're saying. How could I respect a man who married me and then cheated with someone else? What kind of man is that?
I couldn't hide my contempt as I watched Michael panic.
Mom was angry the whole time. Every single day, lying in bed. Dad, I don't think of you as my father anymore. That's why I asked Mom to take you.
Charlotte murmured quietly, and Michael's face turned even paler. The events from earlier seemed to flash through his mind.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me. It's too late to apologize now. Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your mistress and at work. This is the end for us.
The words spilled out of my mouth. Despite the rising sun, the room grew dark. The lights had gone out without us noticing, and a tepid breeze blew from somewhere. That same unpleasant smell from last night started to fill the air.
She's here. Mom's here,
Charlotte said, though I couldn't see Michael's first wife like I did last night. Apparently, Charlotte couldn't see her either. Only Michael was staring wide-eyed at a single spot. She was probably standing there.
No, it's not like that. I didn't abandon you. The truth is, this woman tricked me.
Michael collapsed to the floor, exhausted, pointing at me and shouting. He seemed to imply that I had known about his first wife and still pursued a relationship. But that was completely untrue.
Please, forgive me. If you're angry, blame this woman, do something about her.
Michael cried out to the unseen presence, visibly distressed. His appearance was pathetic, already having lost all self-control.
Please, I love you.
His voice trembled with tears, and then he pathetically tried to cling to me. I instinctively brushed Michael's hand away.
Don't touch me. You were quick to sell me out and make me the sacrifice. Your words are so shallow.
As Michael's anguished cries continued, his gaze seemed fixed on something distant. I could see the space between him and his first wife gradually closing. Goodbye, Dad, Charlotte said, and with that, a strong wind blew through the room, bringing an unpleasant odor with it. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, everything had changed. The room had regained its brightness, but Michael remained hunched on the floor. His mouth hung open, and drool dripped down. He only uttered incomprehensible murmurs, seeming unaware of our presence.
Mom has taken Dad's heart,
Charlotte quietly declared. It was over. Michael's first wife would no longer appear in this house. I might not fully understand everything, but one thing was clear: the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and fresh air was beginning to flow through the house. Thank you, Charlotte. Even though it's my fault that your mom had such a terrible end, I said as I hugged Charlotte tightly. It's all Dad's fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Besides, my first mom understands everything now, Charlotte murmured softly while gently patting my back. Leaving the now broken Michael where he was, we just held each other for a long time. After that, I called an ambulance and had Michael taken to the hospital. The doctor was shocked to see Michael's unresponsive state and diagnosed that he was unlikely to recover. Was there some sudden shock? This isn't normal, the doctor asked, but I couldn't tell the truth and gave a vague answer. Sensing my reluctance, the doctor didn't press further.
Sometimes, as a doctor, I encounter things that are beyond explanation. There might be something supernatural at work.
There was a discussion about Michael's future, but I had no intention of caring for him and decided to have him admitted to a nearby psychiatric hospital. Even with the hospitalization, he wouldn't likely reintegrate into society. After completing the arrangements, I returned home and reported the situation to Charlotte. She nodded silently and said, I think that's best. I don't want to see Dad's face anymore, and I have no intention of taking care of him. I just want him to live freely from now on. Charlotte seemed a bit sad, but she might have felt that her presence was keeping me tied to the past. But I'm going to stay with Charlotte from now on. No matter what happens to Michael, our bond won't change. I love Charlotte deeply, and I'll continue to give her my unwavering love. When I told her this, Charlotte shed tears and repeatedly said, "Thank you." And so, we started a new life together. At Charlotte's request, we decided to leave the old house. Staying there would only bring painful memories for Charlotte. We rented a smaller apartment and began a fresh start together. Charlotte focused on her studies and balanced them with extracurricular activities, enjoying her school life. A few years later, she passed the exam for a prestigious high school and became a high school student. I returned to my previous job and now work hard to support Charlotte's tuition and living expenses. Although I had resumed working, financially, we were secure because of the savings Michael had accumulated. He had planned to build a new house with another woman, and those funds were still available. Since I hadn't divorced Michael for Charlotte's sake, that money ended up in my hands. Of course, I intend to use that money for Charlotte's future, but I'm also determined to earn on my own. Since returning to work, I've felt a renewed sense of fulfillment and purpose in life. My relationship with Charlotte has deepened significantly, and the previous indifference has disappeared. We go shopping together and take trips during holidays. I believe that no matter what challenges await us, the two of us can overcome them together. Even without blood ties, we can be a family. I enjoy my life with Charlotte, believing this wholeheartedly.